Chapter 5. The Fairy Tale Land of the Ivy League. I honestly felt no envy or resentment, only astonishment at how much of a world there was out there, and how much of it others already knew. Sonia's friend Ken graduated from Cardinal Spellman High School a year ahead of her and was the first of her friends to be admitted into Princeton University. He urged her to apply to an Ivy League school too. They had challenged each other academically all through high school, had challenged each other to think critically about social issues and world events, and had challenged each other to present perspectives logically and with conviction ever since they were in forensics club together. He believed in Sonia's skills and that she would be an excellent candidate for an Ivy League school. Sonia didn't know what Ivy League meant. As a good researcher and student, however, she was confident enough that she had a good enough chance to get into a particular kind of school as anyone else. She soon learned that Ivy League is an officially trademarked name for a series of colleges on the East Coast: Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Penn, Brown, Cornell, Dartmouth, and Columbia are the schools that make up the Ivy League. Their names are linked to unparalleled prestige and rigorous academic standards of excellence. Originally, the Ivy Agreement was created to improve intercollegiate athletics, like football. Tuition and expenses could add up to more than $100,000 for 4 years, making it difficult to afford. Many believed only the wealthy could afford to attend an Ivy League school. When Sonia was ready to go to college, it was the time of affirmative action. Affirmative action was a federal policy that gave people of color an improved, and, people argued, fairer, chance at education or jobs that they might not have had otherwise. Employers and universities were supposed to offer equal opportunity programs. In a 1965 speech, U.S. President Lyndon Johnson explained how affirmative action was an attempt at fairness and anti-discrimination. He gave the example that after African Americans had been liberated from slavery, they needed a hand up, a little extra help to get better paying jobs to eventually give back to their communities. He believed that if they were brought to the starting line of a race, if they applied for a job, they couldn't compete for certain positions because, up until that point, they wouldn't have had the skills training or education necessary to get a foot in the door. It wouldn't be fair. Affirmative action resources could help even the playing field. Many say affirmative action gave Sonia a foot in the door to a solid education into an Ivy League school, because otherwise she wouldn't have been admitted. Affirmative action programs didn't guarantee success, though. That was up to each individual person. Calling herself an affirmative action baby, Sonia jumped at the opportunity to further her education. She applied to several Ivy League schools. The movie of the year in 1970 was Love Story, starring Ryan O'Neal and Ally McGraw. What captivated Sonia was the college campus that was featured, Harvard University. The film romanticized love, yes, but it also romanticized the school. It looked like a dream, a fairy tale land of what she imagined a college should look like. The film featured pristine, snowy fields, a cathedral of learning whose denizens lived out what seemed like an antiquarian fantasy, debating under pointy arches, scaling book-lined walls, and lounging on leather couches. So she applied to Harvard. Many years later, she would learn that the movie was actually filmed at Fordham University in the Bronx, not far from where she lived. Had she known that, she might not have left her home turf. The power of the image of Harvard lured her from the comfort of home. She knew she had to leave. The fairy tale land of the Ivy League was unlike anything she had ever seen. The manicured lawns were greener than any park she'd ever played in, and the grass ran for what seemed like miles. The buildings, although they had been around for generations, didn't look anything like the rundown projects that were only a few years old and falling apart already. The minute she stepped onto the Harvard campus to be interviewed for admission to the university, it was like she was under a microscope. Nothing felt right. She went into the president's office waiting room and knew in her gut for the first time that she didn't fit in, that this was all wrong for her. The well-groomed, gracious secretary greeted her nicely enough in her black dress and pearls, but even in her best clothes and with her best manners possible, The vast difference between Sonia and this world paralyzed her. The white couch, the intricate oriental rug, the two little lapdogs that seemed to stand watch over the room all made her feel out of place. They seemed to make a mockery of her. She panicked. Suddenly paralyzed with fear, she didn't know what to say. She didn't feel like she could pull it off. So she ran away, literally ran away from this terrifying situation. But it was to be the last time that she would choose to flee. Before she could be interviewed, before she could convince them she deserved to be there, before she could see herself as a student in the beautiful school that promised her a future better than any she imagined. The Ivy League schools her friends spoke of might just as well have been mountaintop castles, unattainable visions of a better and more beautiful world. They existed in an alien landscape far from her Bronx home. They were nothing more than a fairy tale, a fantasy, and maybe that dreamscape just wasn't for her. Sonia returned home and told her mother what had happened. They didn't dwell on it too much. Her mother stayed positive and believed Sonia would find the right college where she would feel comfortable yet challenged. There were other Ivy League schools besides Harvard to choose from, 8 in all. Maybe like Goldilocks in that fairy tale, Sonia just had to find the college that was just right for her. She had run from Harvard. She visited Yale, but protests dotted and disrupted the campus. She just wanted to get ready for her interview. It felt too progressive for her conservative Catholic upbringing. Neither Harvard nor Yale felt right for her. Then Ken picked her up and took her to his school, the one he spoke of so fondly, Princeton, the 4th oldest college in the United States. Long regarded as one of the finest and most serious-minded of America's colleges and universities, the campus also had an easy vitality that drew Sonia in and made her feel relatively welcome. The students who greeted Sonia were friendly and engaged. Finally, something clicked. Princeton felt just right for Sonia. Princeton opens the door to knowledge. Traditions live long, but the 1970s were a time of change. Accepted into Princeton on a full scholarship, Sonia's class was only the 4th to accept women. Of those women, very few were women of color. Without a prep school background, Sonia felt as though she was in an alien world. Overwhelmed by her new school and environment, it took a while to get into the groove of college life. New York City was a far cry from Princeton, New Jersey. As a city girl, she could mistake cows for horses. In her early days in her dorm, she kept hearing a chirping sound and couldn't figure out what it was, having never heard a cricket before. The cultural divide intrigued Sonia more than intimidated her. When her roommate said she was like Alice, Sonia didn't know who she was referring to. "You don't know who Alice in Wonderland is?" her roommate asked, and went on to explain the classic story. "There was a world I had missed," said Sonia. Hungry to learn more, she asked her roommate for a list of other classics that she might not have read while growing up in a world so far from hers. During the summer, after her freshman year, she hit the library and read as many of the classics as she could, including Jane Austen's novels and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, as well as children's books like those that Lewis Carroll had written. She hadn't lived or experienced what many of her classmates took for granted in their educational and cultural backgrounds. Still an avid reader, it was her pleasure to catch up. Unprepared for the caliber of competition and educational standards, but with the work ethic her mother had instilled in her, she set out to find resources to help her improve her study habits. Competitive against herself, after her first midterm paper was returned with low marks, she sought help. "I needed to learn how to write at Princeton," she said. With every paper, she became better. When she could, she studied grammar books. The chair of the Latin American Studies Department guided her. Like other mentors, he wanted to see her succeed. He dissected her writing, circled every noun and adjective, told her to think and write in English rather than try to translate from Spanish to English. Every course she took with him, her writing improved. It took a while for Sonia to integrate herself and become comfortable in her new surroundings, but she studied them and analyzed them, asking questions to determine which situation best suited her and what all the variables were. Even getting a poor grade on a midterm didn't deter her for long. Sonia got to know Princeton, got to know her place in it, and learned how to be an asset to it as well. Using its resources to further her goal of becoming a judge someday, she started to make her presence known. That dream never left her. In fact, the dream became clearer with every academic success she had. Activist on campus. The 1970s was a time in United States history when social justice issues were brought to the forefront of Americans' consciousness, especially on college campuses. Students made their voices heard with issues pertaining to civil rights, women's rights, and the United States' participation in the Vietnam War, for example. Already possessed of a sensitivity for the plight of others, Sonia was able to stay on the path that Senator Robert Kennedy had inspired with his own mission for social justice. She became involved with groups on campus such as Acción Puertorriqueña, a Puerto Rican activist group, and the Third World Center, which provided a social, cultural, and political environment that reflected the needs and concerns of students of color at the university. She found a home at the Third World Center. Princeton was like living in a parallel world. The Third World Center, however, brought together many different ethnic groups, socioeconomic groups, and a diversity of women of color. It was a home to a bigger family with common interests. This family could better relate to where Sonia came from and what she was about. She said, "At Princeton, I began a lifelong commitment to identifying myself as a Latina, taking pride in being Hispanic, and in recognizing my obligation to help my community reach its fullest potential in this society. Acción Puertorriqueña, the Puerto Rican group on campus then, and the Third World Center provided me with the anchor I needed to ground myself in this new and different world." Not everyone who came from privilege could understand her background. "You have to understand my mother raised us on $5,000 a year," she said. Some found the groups radical on account of their vehemence in fighting discrimination, protesting, writing letters, meeting with administrators, but it was a platform to improve their conditions and their rights. Sonia saw a bigger world and how decisions could have an impact on not just one person, but a ripple effect on communities, states, even a nation. At the same time, she didn't want to limit herself by surrounding herself exclusively with Latino things. She got all that back home. Wanting exposure to more, she worked with the university's discipline committee once it was established and started developing her legal skills. As the student representative on a board made up of faculty and students, she would hear minor cases against students and help to decide the discipline or punishment. With her mother and grandmother as role models, healers in their own right, Sonia's work through the Third World Center led her to volunteer as an interpreter at Trenton Psychiatric Hospital. It made her aware of how many people fell through the cracks of the system and were lost. Between her studies, work, and volunteer efforts, Sonia's energy was at an all-time high, but her diabetes remained an everyday concern. No one really knew her routine included keeping her diabetes in check so that she could live a normal life. Normal included visits from her mother and brother and a couple of times a year, as well as regular visits from Kevin and a cousin or two. She received weekly correspondence from Abuelita, her lifeline, her connection to those island girl values and all that mattered. But in her sophomore year, when the envelopes didn't arrive for 2 weeks straight, Sonia asked her mother what was up. And just like that, normalcy was shattered. Abuelita had cancer and was in the hospital. The family had always called Sonia Mercedes Chiquita, Little Mercedes, because they were so alike. When Abuelita died, the pain cut into Sonia's heart. Going back to classes, Sonia refocused her energy to make her Abuelita proud of her. Although she was challenged at first, she pushed herself to really learn. work hard, and serve her communities. All Sonia's hard work paid off when the president of the college called her into his office to tell her the good news. She was graduating with Phi Beta Kappa honors and summa cum laude. She knew it had to be good, but once again, she didn't know how good. I had no idea what summa cum laude meant. As soon as she left his office, she raced to the library to look it up. With greatest honor, she read. Sonia's exceptional grades and performance had earned her the highest academic recognition of excellence. This was also reinforced at her 1976 graduation, where she was awarded the Moses Taylor Pine Honor Prize, the highest academic achievement award given to a Princeton undergraduate. The recipient had to be an all-rounder, a student with exceptional character who demonstrated excellence in academics, leadership with campus organizations, and effective support of the best interests of Princeton University. Sonia more than fit the bill. Her experiences at Princeton were hugely influential on her later life, and she later described them as transformative. She had found in that university a place of shared values and fierce competition, and made a home for herself there. Sonia had come to Princeton, an alien land, a castle on the mountaintop, conquered it, and left her mark. But she knew she had much work ahead of her. In her yearbook, next to her photo, was a quote from American socialist Norman Thomas, and it read, "I am not a champion of lost causes, but of causes not yet won."